All right, this is my husband, Craig Elliott.
How are we doing, folks?
He's joining us today because he's going to share stuff that I can't share. We just want to talk a little bit about our marriage together. And how old were you when you met me?
I was 19 when I met you.
I think you were 19 and
Yep.
I was 18, yep. We got married the next summer.
Yep, so I was...
A little young, weren't you?
Yeah, a little. Probably some of you were younger than we were when we first got married, too. But I know we're not the earliest, but we are right there at 19 and 20 years of age, so we now have celebrated 24 years
24
of marriage.
years, yep. So we've known each other 25.
Yep.
A lot of people said it would never work.
Yes.
It was impossible. We were too different? Were we too similar? I can't remember.
It was too different.
Too different, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yep.
But it has worked. Why do you think? I mean, because I said I was stubborn and I wasn't ever going to leave you?
Yeah, it could be one reason. I know that one of the things that we used to talk about when we were dating was the fact that there were times that we had quite a bit of struggles when we were actually dating. And
Yeah, I'm argumentative.
yeah, just a little. She is argumentative. I'm not, though.
No.
But we used to talk quite a bit, and in the process of that, we were very similar on many things, but there were obviously things that we were quite a bit different too. And one of the problems was the fact that in these differences, we obviously would struggle to try and find how we were going to get together with them. I can't remember exactly what those things were.
I remember one. You said all our kids were going to go to public school. I was like, no, that was after we were married.
Yeah.
I don't think I actually...
I think we talked about
maybe,
it before.
But I remember kind of panicking. Like,
Yeah.
I wanted our kids to go to Christian school, which is kind of funny because I don't really want them to anymore.
No. And neither of us wanted homeschooling
No.
because, that was where all the weird kids were
Yeah,
at,
they would never be socialized.
All the kids that I knew growing up that were homeschooled were a little bit odd, and I didn't want my kids to be odd. And not in like a biblical sense odd, but odd in that they had very unusual social skills and things like that. And I didn't want my kids to be like that. So I was like, no, we're not doing homeschooling. No.
We did agree on that. It's just funny.
Yeah.
But, so why do you think,
Well, I remember
why'd you stay with me?
when we were dating, we heard in a message or something like that a story of a couple, I believe a couple, two believers from India. They were an Indian couple, and their family still practiced the concept of having an arranged marriage. And so these two young adults had their marriage arranged by their parents when they were very little, something like 4 and 5 or 5 and 6 years of age. And the day had come for their marriage, and they had actually never seen each other before the day of their marriage. They lived in 2 different villages, so they had never had any connections, never had any ability to meet each other, to get to know their values and differences and similarities and all those kind of things. And here they are, the woman's marching down the aisle to wed her new husband on the day of their marriage, the first time they'd ever met. And I remember them talking, the person that was relaying the story was saying how they had gotten married and they had gone to start living together as a couple, and they decided we are going to choose to love each other. And this couple now was much older, and they'd been married for many years and had a wonderful marriage and a blessed marriage. And they were talking about the person who we heard the story from was asking, well, how did this work? How did you did you have a lot of arguments and fights, and how did you stay together? And simply put, they just said we chose to love each other. And so that's such a huge biblical principle.
Mm-hmm.
Because
it's not about emotions.
No, I mean, like, for instance, when Yeshua says that when your enemy strikes you to turn the other cheek, or when your enemy tells you to carry his cloak for a mile, do it too. I think that is truly an outpouring of Yeshua's understanding of the concept of choosing to love someone, and biblical love, unconditional love as we oftentimes call it, the love that God gives to us. And the fact that what it means is that if I choose to love you, when the enemy, says carry my stuff a mile, and you say, okay, I'll carry it too, you're doing something that just is beyond what that person's concept of you was capable of understanding. So when you think about that concept of unconditional love, then that person, you're doing something to that person that that just blows their mind. And when you do those kind of things, it begins to open up the opportunity to influence the person, to really show your care, and not because you're not going to do these things because you want to influence them. If you do that, then you just failed in the whole understanding of unconditional love. But you do those things so that it opens up those opportunities, and that person may see you and see the relationship in a different light. And these two individuals have learned that their belief system and their likes and dislikes slowly started to grow towards each other. They didn't think theirs was the only way that things could be. So it wasn't his and hers. It became their likes and their dislikes and their wants and their desires instead of his and hers. And when that happens, that's where you get the idea of what the scriptures, I think, talk about with echad, or oneness, where you're not looking to get your stuff or my stuff. We're looking to get our stuff together, and you have to begin to see that in your own marriage.
I think our first son was born a few years later, 2.5 years later, and I remember that there was a godly couple that came along at that time and gave us some advice that helped. It helped because we were committed to each other, but we were having hard times. Finances were tough. I mean, there were just a lot of hard things in our lives right then, and they gave us a lot of good advice. Do you remember? I mean, I remember there was some advice that helped us become friends and to kind of rekindle some of the like that we had for each other. Do you?
Well, some things that I remember. Obviously, when you have a newborn child. And I was working nights at the time, overnights, and so I'd come home and I'd be exhausted, and Ann was, obviously up a lot of times with the baby at night, and during the day was doing different things, and so number one, we were kind of on this different schedule with that, and then the baby also altered the schedule a little bit too. I'm sure many of you have had that experience.
And money was tight.
And money was tight also.
Very tight.
So we didn't have anything we could just hire babysitters or do things. No. We didn't have any of that ability at all. So this individual, this couple came along and said, are you making it a priority in your life to spend time together? Because what happens is when we're on these divergent paths so often, or even parallel paths, but never touching each other, never coming in contact continuously, we tend to fall apart and drift, and it becomes more and more difficult to sit there and talk. Maybe you've had a friend you knew growing up, and you were good friends, but then you moved away or something like that, and you went away to colleges in different places, and you didn't see each other for several years. Then you come back together, and there's not that intimacy, that ability to just get there and start talking again. It takes time to steadily, remember who this person is and to get to know each other, and you almost are in this shallow relationship with that person because you're separated for so long. Well, that happens in marriages too. You can actually live in the same house and you share the same bed and be unfamiliar with the person that you are married to.
And I think the dangers with Facebook and social media is that sometimes we share our heart on those places, private messages with our friends, and we get it off our chest, and then we never tell our husband. So what do we do about it?
Well, on the same note, I'm going to add one more thing. I remember a struggle I had is I would go away I of course worked in the public school system at the time, and like I was an administrator, for instance, and I would deal with parents and issues and struggles that they were going through, and some of them were very difficult. And I had colleagues who, of course, were having the same problems, so we would communicate with each other, and we would tell each other the problems we were having and the struggles and stuff. And I found that what would happen is that I would use all my words up at school and deal with all my issues at school, and go home and have a struggle communicating with my wife. And so then again, because we were struggling to communicate, we were steadily getting these divergent paths. So this couple, going back to this original couple, one of the things they stated that we must do is learn to practice coming together every day and taking time, making it a priority every day to get together, sit down, and to just spend time with each other. And this is not something where like you have a script, you know. You would just begin talking, and don't make it forced. It's not something where like you're having to sit there and really work at it. Just start,
just
communicating.
come plop on the couch.
Yeah, just
next to
come
each
plopping
other.
and
Just
sitting
start
there.
talking.
Maybe have a drink, some coffee or tea or a Coke or something, and just sit there and talk. And the other thing is of course, like we said, we had children at the time, so we worked at really making it at a time where our children initially were at a time where they were occupied, where they were not getting up and every 2 seconds and, oh, excuse me, hold on just a second, honey, and then going and doing with the child, because what that says to your spouse, once again, when you're having these times where it struggles is the children are more important than you.
Yeah, they could wait.
Yeah. And so we would work at making the children wait for this time. And it wasn't like 2 hours. It was like 15, 20 minutes. Yeah. And it just
get things off our chest.
Yeah. And it set the tone that to us, to each other, and to our children, that mommy and daddy are important to each other. And mommy and daddy need this time to refresh and be close to each other. And when we were doing that, once the kids kind of were in the mindset and understanding that this is what was going to happen, we really started practicing this and implementing it, our kids learned to eventually calm down. Now, if originally though, especially once we got more of them and the younger ones were coming up, like when we got to about the 3 children, there were some times, do you remember this, where
yeah.
what
they
would
be
happen?
Perfectly happy and content until you sit down on the couch to talk to your husband, and then all of a sudden they're crying. You're like, how does that work? Or they're interrupting constantly.
Yeah, they were
all
coming.
suddenly thirsty, and tell you the story, and
And so you have to really work on the fact that you're not going to allow the children to interrupt that time. And I know that sometimes is hard when we think, oh, it's our poor little 2-year-old or our poor little 5-year-old,
7-year-old.
But it's your poor marriage, and your marriage is
it's going to last longer.
Yes, and when the children are gone and out of the home and on their own marriages, your marriage is still going to be there, and the intimacy that is needed in a marriage requires that communication level, and so. When we do these things, it gives us an opportunity to begin to slowly remember each other's issues and concerns, and to start to get past that superficial level of talking of, hi honey, how you doing today? Oh, I'm fine. How are you doing, honey? Oh, I'm okay. And then go on to your things. But we began to realize that we would begin to talk more issues. We would begin to get into deeper things. We would begin to share our deeper feelings, and so that communication, that depth of communication, worked out into all the other areas of our marriage, and sustained our marriage, and even in times where we were struggling and the stresses were high, this would be a highlight of our day, a moment where we could come together and encourage each other. Sometimes we would use that time to pray together, and that was an important facet. And that is something, nothing like prayer together to relieve the stress of what's going on in a day or what's going on in a relationship.
Yeah, I always cry when he prays, though. That frustrates me, because he's praying, but it just shows to show you the level of emotion that's there.
Yeah.
That is kind of pent up. We would go on dates too.
Yes.
We tried to do dates, and even when we were poor, we would go do silly things that were just completely free, like people watching at the airport. That was before 9/11. But one of the things I noticed on a date is that the first half hour or so, as you're driving to wherever you're going to go, because we would usually live a little ways away from something, I couldn't get my head off of the problems of the day. But by the end of the evening, I'm talking his ear off, and I'm like, well, go around the block again. I have more to tell you.
Yeah.
Go another mile. So.
And it's good if you take those extended times away on date night type idea, where you go out on dates in the evening and spend some time away from your children, get a babysitter, or maybe if you have parents nearby, to ask them if they would take them for a couple hours. That's an extended time where you get beyond the issues of the day, and you can actually start to talk about your life and dreaming,
planning goals,
and
it's fun.
and the exciting things that are happening, and you get beyond that second level. To me, there's almost 3 levels of communication. There's your basic acquaintance level, where you're just talking about how's the weather and how's your day, and the answers are usually one word answers: fine, good, hi, bye. Then there's the second level, which is kind of a friendship level, where you begin to talk about issues, what's going on in your day, how work is, and all these different things. And then there's the intimacy level, which it should be something that's saved for very few people, extremely best friend type of thing, and hopefully your spouse is your extremely best friend. And that's the level that I think dates get you to, where you develop that intimacy with each other, and the things that you get to talking to are deep, and sometimes they're not easy. Sometimes we would go out and we would go on a date night, and you're talking about hey,
finances,
heavy finances things, or work, really struggle. How am I going to deal with this new thing going on at work? And you would begin to really get that intimacy. Or, let's face it, there's other issues in marriage. Obviously children, and how to deal with the children, and in-laws, or parents, or siblings, aunts, uncles, other extended family. And we'll say the big word, sexual relationships, and how is your intimacy with your spouse in there. Those things are all valuable and essential for a lasting, enjoyable relationship.
I have a big one. The big stress, I think, that hits most of the families that will be watching this is, what do you do if your beliefs about Scripture differ? When maybe one person starts to see that they should obey all of the Bible from cover to cover, and the other one is maybe not so convinced.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we've had friends that this situation has happened. One is coming to desire to do Torah, the other is not, and it doesn't end up well, and that's a sad thing, because the new belief system breaks the relationship. And for instance, one person, maybe together when you were first married, you had pretty worldly standards, and everything was going along great, and then one person becomes a believer, and the other one does not, and changes their behavior, and it breaks down the relationship.
It takes all the fun out from one person's perspective.
So the key to that, for the person who is the believer, is to make sure that you are not allowing your belief system to become a crutch to not be a spouse, a proper spouse, a loving husband, or a loving wife to the spouse. Because God doesn't call us to break up those kind of relationships.
No.
In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. Would you agree from Scripture?
Absolutely.
I see, I think it's in 1 Corinthians 7, where it talks about, if one's a believer and the other is not, that you stay with the believer. Now, if the unbeliever wants to leave, you can't force them to want to stay. But the key there is, and if you look throughout Scripture, is don't be the catalyst for making them want to leave. Don't be the one doing all the stuff that's just driving the other one so nuts that they can't handle being with you anymore.
Yeah, your character should be so kind and loving and gentle that they actually want to stay, even though you don't agree on some really major things. You're just their friend,
Yeah. So, if you think about Scripture, I think it's in 1 Peter.
1 Peter 3.
Is it 3, where it talks about how the husband and the wife are to relate to each other. It talks about wives, okay? And in there, and dealing with the wives, it says that she is to be to take care of her husband, to love him, not to nag him. She's a believer, he's an unbeliever. Let's start there. So if we were to give a first-hand understanding of that in the scripture, think of Timothy's mom and dad. His dad was a Greek unbeliever. His mom was a Hebrew believer, a Jewish believer, and had brought him up learning Torah and stuff along with the grandmother. And
that could have been sticky.
Yeah, I know. It seems like it might have been a little bit. We obviously know that Timothy wasn't circumcised, and to a Jewish family, of course, we understand that was an important thing.
Yeah.
So here, they grew up teaching him the scriptures, the Torah, and things like that, but leaving him uncircumcised, which was probably because the father refused to have it done. Mm-hmm. The mother didn't go out and go, no, I'm going to have it done anyhow, and march down to the local synagogue and have him circumcised. She waited. And what happens? Well, when he grows up, Paul takes him along and he gets circumcised. Yeah, it wasn't the most ideal for Timothy, but it happened. And she didn't divorce her husband and say, get lost because I don't want to be around you. And we don't hear any of that. Instead, we hear more about love and a relationship where she was able to raise Timothy in this way to show compassion and love and mercy. And you can see in his character what his mother and grandmother instilled, how they instilled that kind of a love and mercy. So, for instance, if we look at in the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 6, the famous chapter everybody talks about with teaching your children along the way when they're sitting and when they're standing and walking and working and so on and so forth. The first part of that, a lot of people miss, and the part of that I see in there is the part where Moses says to the children of Israel, you as adults keep the commandments.
Have them on your heart.
Yeah, the first thing that they have to do is to have them on your heart, and you be doing them and you be keeping them before you can instill them in your children. Because if you do not have the character of doing these things and you then try to teach them in their children, you are very quickly seen in your children's eyes as a hypocrite, and they want nothing to do with that lifestyle or what you believe because they see you as false.
Mm-hmm. So it comes back to the idea of being echad, or one. And if you're not one with your husband and his beliefs, you can at least be one in your marriage. I mean, in being going. How am I trying to say this? You can at least be kind. You can act like a right kind of wife and a right kind of husband, even, and that at least shows Torah principles. That you believe that you really do what you believe.
I think a lot of the authors of the scriptures and apostolic scriptures, in dealing with relationships, especially the marriage, are dealing with two emotions that usually come out. One of those two things that were talked about by the authors of the scriptures, the apostles and disciples, was, I think, arrogance or pride in dealing with the relationship, where that would be the kind of the person who would say, hey, I've come to Torah, and now you're not as good a person as I am, and you need to be told how you're doing all these different things wrong, and you need to be told how to get your life right with God.
Become more like a nagging mother than a best friend.
Oh, absolutely. You become the
father.
The mother-in-law that everybody talks about that no one wants to be, yet we become that because we think that we are better than the person. And it's out of
concern for that person. It is.
It can be, I think. But I would like to think that, but there is sometimes where...
It doesn't come across that way to the other person.
Yeah, I think that pride can lift someone up to where they think they're better than the other person. They now have all the understanding of how they're supposed to raise their children, and they have all the understanding of how they're supposed to live, and what they're supposed to watch on TV and not watch on TV, and what they're supposed to listen to is music and not music, and how they're supposed to drive their
what
car,
we're supposed to eat.
Or not. Yeah, all these different things become matters of pride, and we are more than willing to tell our spouse.
We forget that we didn't know these things just a very short time ago.
Yes, and that we're steadily learning, and there's probably a lot that we don't understand ourselves.
There sure is, yep.
And there's always someone smarter than us out there who knows more than us. And if we think that way, it sometimes can keep us humble. So that was one, pride. The second one, though, is fear. And with fear, we may be afraid that the person is not going to isn't righteous and isn't going to be approved by God. We may be afraid that our children aren't going to grow up right because you have this unbelieving spouse or un-Torah observant spouse.
That's totally understandable.
Yeah, or maybe fear that God's going to judge you because you're still with this person. And so we have several in these different passages. The apostles speak about the fact that that's not how we're supposed to live. If we live in fear, what happens is we tend to put that fear onto our spouse, and we are constantly concerned, and we live a life that isn't in intimacy and respect.
We're trying to run the universe all by ourselves.
Yeah. Have you ever seen someone who likes to micromanage things, and then when that micromanaging is threatened because things are out of their control, what does that person become like?
Not fun to be around.
Yeah. And so if you were the spouse of that type of a person who's come to Torah but doesn't have the control and is living in fear, then they begin to become a nuisance, an annoyance, and begin to break down their relationship. And so I think of the passage in 1 John where it says that perfect love casts out fear. And if we understand perfect love, that's the whole what we were talking about earlier of agape love or unconditional love. The love your enemy is that perfect love, excuse me. And with dealing with a spouse, an unbelieving spouse, it's trusting God to deal with that person, not taking on the responsibility yourself. Because you can't change another person. We can't change a person who is an unbeliever into a believer. We can share things with them in love, but that person is responsible for making that change in their life, right?
Yeah. One of the practical things for us, because I think I did start to see Torah before you, but we were very blessed to be able to stay together through it all.
Absolutely.
One of the things that helped me is that verse in 1 Corinthians 14 where it says if a woman has questions, she should ask her husband at home. It's kind of not the context. It's talking about a woman being silent in the congregation, but I just started to think about that and think about the fact that I could run off to some pastor, some teacher, some person online, send him emails and ask him all my questions, or I could just sit down and study it out together with him. And I meant, sincerely asking questions, not asking a question to try to bait him.
Yeah.
But sincerely saying, what do you think about this verse? And you can kind of tell when you've hit that wall where, you know what, this conversation needs to end because we're getting a little bit mad. And then you need to just go have some fun and stop thinking, let Yehovah be in his timing and in his will work on their heart. But it seems to be a good strategy.
Yeah.
Would you give any advice to some of the men that might be listening that maybe do walk in Torah and their wife also walks in Torah? They're united on these things. What are some of the things that you see that a man should do? What's his role in the family? How is he supposed to lead his wife? I mean, do you have any advice on this? I'm putting him on the spot.
If you're in the perfect marriage, how do you need help?
Right.
I don't know.
Exactly.
We kind of switch gears there a little bit.
Right, but I mean, a lot of them listening they're united on Torah. They do both want to walk in it.
Well, obviously, Ephesians chapter 5 talks. We a lot of times, when I was growing up, messages and stuff would deal with the women, and of course they're supposed to respect their wives and submit to their husband, or respect their husbands and submit to their husbands and all this stuff. And we'd hardly talk about the husbands except in how they deal with the kids, which is in Ephesians chapter 6 there. But in there it talks about how the husband was supposed to love the wife. And the key there, I think, is to show great honor to your wife. Don't take her for granted. If you work and she's at home doing the schooling, don't come home and then expect her to act like she's not doing anything and needs to wait on you hand and foot because hey, you're the breadwinner at work, kind of an idea. But you need to go along right beside her, and things that we like to do is go into the kitchen and prepare meals together, because while you're cutting up veggies and you're cooking, you're stuck to the stove. The perfect time to talk to them, and that's that extra intimacy time that you get is wonderful to communicate, just in the day-to-day stuff.
I think she just wants to know he cares.
Absolutely.
That means a lot.
And coming in and helping out and asking to help out. She may not want you to help. She may say, no, I want to do this. Then sit there and talk to her. Don't go necessarily running off into the other room, flipping the TV on, or if we're really being spiritual here, going and throwing open your Bible and start studying Torah for the next 2 hours while she's enslaving over the kitchen stove. There's a time when actually studying and being all spiritual can actually be not spiritual, because it's not building a relationship that God has ordained, a loving relationship between a husband and wife. And so there's times that we need to I think that God desires more to be intimate with each other and to show His love to each other than it is to go off and study the Torah. And we've heard people like this, where one of the spouses,
they're married to the Torah.
And they're married to all the videos on YouTube and going and watching every video, and they'd forget about their spouse because they're so wanting to learn about Torah, and they literally, even though they're both Torah observant, they actually drive the other one to turn away from Torah.
They're lonely.
Because they're lonely.
One of the things, and I think we'll probably wrap up with this one, but one of the things that I really appreciate about you is that you lead our kids. And when I say a rule for one of the kids, and one of them comes and asks you didn't know I said something, he checks with me. He says, what did your mom say? Which, of course, ruins their plan. And, we're united in our parenting. And even though sometimes I think we were wrong, maybe we made a rule that was too strict or too loose, but we stick together. We be united.
We're not trying to say we're perfect in anything like this, but by and large, if sometimes she would, this may sound weird to some of you, I will say that, but there'd be days where if she was having a rough time at home, and there was times I had an opportunity to have a break during lunch, and some of you may not have this all the time, or you may not have it at all, but I did, and she would call me up and say, a couple of them are just really pushing all my buttons, and is there any way that you could talk to them? A lot of times,
I was usually crying when I said this.
So a lot of times I would just get the phone. She'd put them on the phone, and I'd put my sternest dad voice on and say, yeah, that's enough. You better not be doing this anymore. And if your mom tells you to do something and you don't do it, when I get home, you're going to be in trouble.
It works.
That was one thing. Or if it was a really, really bad thing,
one time you came home.
A couple times I asked if I could go home for a short amount of time, and I went home for my lunch break instead of eating it at work, and went home and dealt with the kids, and then came back. And it took a lot of effort. That took an effort to do those things. But see, when you do those efforts, when you make that extra time, both for your spouse and for your children, those are the times where you get it. That's the taking the cloak an extra mile that Yeshua talks about. Or when someone slaps you on the cheek, turning the other cheek. That's that extra thing that can get someone to jar them into seeing how serious and how much you value them, or how much you value that relationship, or how serious maybe the child's negative behavior is, that you took the time to come out of your normal day and deal with that time. And when you do those things, it makes a huge impact on others in your family.
I think it affects our kids. That certain incident you were talking about, we won't name the child, but the child is much, much older now, almost an adult, and remembers that situation, and it changed the child. And I just was this one illustration, but when parents are united on how things are to be done at home, whether it's Torah observance or just everyday practical things around the house, chores and so on, it makes a huge effect on the kids, and they okay, that's the way it is around here, then we're going to do it that way.
Yeah. Now, she said Torah observance. Now, we just got done talking about what if you're separate and not on the same page. the one who's the Torah observant, we were just talking about this. Don't live your life in fear of how God's going to all of a sudden, he's going to destroy you, or you're going to go to hell. If your husband says, for instance, on the Sabbath, if you're a wife, or vice versa even, hey, let's go out work out in the yard, and you go, no, it's the Sabbath, I'm not going to do it because God doesn't want it, you're building a break in that relationship. And the question then is God able to look at the heart of the person, number one? Two, can he take, and when you go out and actually work on the Sabbath, can he see your heart and then see how you love your husband and you want him to come to Torah? Your husband knows your views on Torah. He knows that you don't work on the Sabbath. But you go out there with a sweet attitude and you say, yes, honey, because you asked, I'll do this because I love you. And you go out and you do it. You don't have to say that every time. In fact, you don't even necessarily have to say that.
Probably
your
not.
actions will show. If you go out there and you're stomping around and throwing things and stuff while you're working out in the yard, you just failed. You've not only not done the Sabbath, but you've also showed your husband that you don't love him in that way you're acting. But if you go out there with the right attitude, and maybe even on the way, pray to God and say, Father, I don't want to do this. You know that. I'm doing it because I love my husband and you want me to love my husband. Allow this to be an opportunity for him to work, work in his life, and allow him to see that I'm doing this even though it's not what is best, because I love him and want him to see Torah.
He might provide a way of escape.
Yeah, he might break you away from that.
Might be a thunderstorm or something.
Yep. But
Maybe
he
not.
may have you go through it.
Maybe not. Yeah.
But he can use those times. Those are powerful moments. It's the same thing. That's the cloak for the extra mile. Mm-hmm. Because
a good example would be Abraham and Sarah. He asked her to join a harem and lie and say that she was his sister, and she did it. She did it.
Yeah, and we can put ourselves in that situation and say, I don't know how in the world Sarah didn't say something, but she didn't, and she allowed God to work in that situation to protect her, but he also allowed God to work in Abraham's life to get him to be the man he was supposed to be. And if the spouse is always taking that responsibility in their own hands, then they do not give God the window to do the greater work in the life of their spouse, mm-hmm. to bring them into that oneness that they really truly desire. And so many times a person wants that oneness, but they're trying to do it on their terms and in their time frame and their timetable and on their standards. And when they do that, you do not give any room for God to work in that relationship.
Can I share a story?
Sure.
We have 3 children who are drivers now, and I often am the one who sits in the passenger side of the seat while the new driver is driving. It's very stressful, and part of the reason that it's stressful is because I don't have a brake, I don't have a steering wheel, and I've gotten into the habit of just placing my arm, right along the edge of the door and hanging on for dear life, and that way I'm not grabbing everything when they go around the corner badly.
You just constantly have white knuckles on the door, so it doesn't look like any different when actually you need to.
I've been, they have no idea I'm stressed. But I've been pondering it a lot lately, and the fact is that, and you don't know this because you weren't there, but in our earlier sessions today, we talked about the providence of God and how He is in control, even no matter what situation He takes you through. And I mean, it's not quite the same as driving, but in a marriage, you have to sit on the passenger side, and you might be white-knuckled, but you have to trust and that He is taking you on the path He wants you to be on, and you can't try to reach over and grab the steering wheel from it wouldn't go over so well if I did that to you.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the story I thought of.
So basically what you're saying is you can't go over there and every time you think there might be a problem or you can't just keep driving for the person.
It's one thing for my 16-year-old. It'd be quite another for you if I didn't agree with your driving and reached over and grabbed the wheel.
But even if you're 16-year-old, if you're just constantly keeping your hand on the wheel trying to drive the whole time,
like that.
they're never going to learn how to drive.
No.
And so with
probably never invite me to come along.
No. And so if your spouse you constantly are trying to grab the wheel from God and drive
He
that
is the one who has the
Torah,
wheel, right?
They're never going to learn Torah.
No.
That's just the truth of the matter. I've never seen a relationship that we've been in, excuse me, whether it's a complete unbeliever and a believer, or
It doesn't matter who it is.
Torah observant and non-Torah observant, or Torah observant believer and non-believer, it doesn't matter what. I've never seen one where the spouse tries to take control and really work the relationship towards coming to this new belief system, that it ever results in that person believing. The only ones we've ever seen actually work is where the spouse finally let go and allowed God to truly work.
It's like jumping off a cliff, but it's
and knowing that God has a safety net. Obviously, jumping off a cliff is for most people is extremely fearful, even if they knew that the safety net was down there. And so we don't want to do it. But God says jump, because I'm there and I'll catch you. And we just have to jump off that cliff of release of control and allow God to work in the life of our spouse with this. I don't know if you have something.
No, go ahead.
We found this sign one time believe it or not, at a truck stop early on in our marriage.
Yep. I think it was the first week of our marriage, on our honeymoon.
Yeah, was it?
Yep, in Florida.
I didn't remember exactly where. I was thinking it was up in where we lived at college. But anyhow, it's called Rules for a Happy Marriage. And
We'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah, we'll put it. But I'll go ahead and talk about it here. Here are the rules for a happy marriage. Number 1, never both be angry at the same time. So true. But if your husband's angry or your wife is angry, you try not to get angry.
A soft answer turns away wrath. I don't
but
always practice this.
Anger, yeah. And you know what? If you know the other person's angry and you go and you start
pushing the buttons,
you're not going to get them to calm down, are you?
Nope.
And it's Number 2, never yell at each other unless the house is on fire.
Yep.
Hard to do, and I will say that we've not been perfect at either of these in our lifetime.
We're not arguing, we're just being passionate.
Yes. But, having this around and seeing these, glimpsing at them periodically, it does get on your mind, and sometimes when you're in that moment, or getting ready to be in that moment, it can stop you from having those moments. Number 3, if one of you has to win an argument, let it be your mate.
I'm not good at this. I like to win.
I don't think most people are. Yeah, we both like to win. So I think that's a huge issue.
But even like silly things. Okay, a second ago I thought this sign, we bought it in Florida. You thought we got it in Pennsylvania. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. We could keep going on and on.
Yes,
but guess what? We're not one's going to win this argument, and all it's going to do is get us angry.
Right.
So sometimes you just have to step back, and to say, okay. And if both of you are wanting the mate to win the argument, guess what? You probably aren't going to have too many arguments in your life. That's a huge one. And that goes into that unconditional love, too. Because, if you love someone unconditionally, you don't care about winning arguments. You may be super 100% accurately right all the time. But you know what? If you win the argument, you may lose the friendship or the love or the spouse. Number 4, if you have to criticize, do it lovingly. And let's face it, there are times that criticism is necessary. Now, I should probably tell on myself, and if you think of something, please tell on it. But like early on, my wife Ann wasn't always the best cook, and she didn't know how to cook for like how I like things and stuff.
Already.
And I know you know that. But she would burn a lot of stuff. Most of it was because she enjoys getting involved in something, and sometimes cooking, like I was saying earlier, you're strapped to the stove kind of a thing while you cook, because it just takes 1 second to go from done to burn. Where she would go off and like a lot of mom, read a book or go dealing with something on the computer or dealing with kids too. Okay, we're not going to be, and so after a while, this kind of like she's getting frustrated because her cooking wasn't working and stuff, and I finally said, honey, probably if you stay next to the stove and try not to get distracted by other things, you might not burn stuff. That's criticism, but I was did it in a very kind way. I wasn't like, I can't believe you always are burning the food. We have to pay for that. I work hard days doing that. Why do you have to burn the food all the time?
No, you never said that.
I never said anything like that.
You never
but
said
if you
that.
do something, like, you can see where that would destroy a person. Where the other way, it hardly even sounds like you're criticizing anything. You're just trying to give some good advice.
Mm-hmm.
So if you criticize, do it lovingly. Number 5, never bring up mistakes of the past. That's a huge one. Next one, neglect the whole world rather than each other.
Which is what we've been saying.
Yeah, and that includes children. Mm. And I know it's a scary thing.
You're not really neglecting them.
You're not going to neglect your children, and your children's neglecting them for your husband will allow them to see how awesome your relationship is.
They'll have good marriages.
Exactly. Because you're not trying to raise children, you're trying to raise adults. And if you try to always think that you're going to raise a kid, then when they're 20, you'll have a kid. Mm-hmm. And you don't want that. You don't want to have a kid going into a marriage, like you did at 20, like we did at 20 and 21 years old, and acting like a child, because when they do, they're going to end up with a horrible marriage. So raise adults. God wants us to raise well-trained adults. He doesn't want us to raise well-trained children. Mm-hmm. Okay? So model what it is to be an adult, and your children will begin to rise to that occasion. Never go to sleep with an argument unsettled. And there's been many sleepless nights we've had because of that, dealing with that. Not tons, but
it's biblical. But don't let the sun go down on your wrath.
Yeah, and so we really work till we get it done. And I'll tell you what, we may be exhausted the next day, but usually by the day after that, we're happy that we did that. Mm-hmm. At least once every day, try to say one kind or complimentary thing to your life's partner, and that goes into the whole love thing. Mm-hmm. And you have to work at loving somebody. And so, like the Indian couple at the beginning we were talking about, they had to work at saying loving things because they didn't know anything about each other. So they had to work at finding things to say, I really like your hair today. It's really beautiful. Or I really
thank you.
Thank you
for taking the garbage out.
Or thank you for cooking my dinner. It was very good. I appreciate it.
Very good. If I scrape off the burnt parts.
If I add a little Tabasco sauce. The next one, when you have done something wrong, be ready to admit it and ask for forgiveness. And that's a huge one.
That's a hard one.
And you know what? That's part of modeling it for your children too.
If
you can do that, there are many times I've had to apologize to my children because of things I've done. And it's a humbling experience because they're my kids. But you know what? I then can use that to teach them how we need to ask for forgiveness and we need to apologize when we do things wrong, and it makes an impact. Next, it takes two to make a quarrel, and the one in the wrong is the one who does the most talking. It sounds too trivial, but the reality is it's usually true. Because the one who's doing the most talking is trying to prove that they're right all the time, and usually that person, they're wrong. God says they're wrong, and the reason they're wrong is once again they're trying to win the argument, not show perfect love. And God says that's wrong. Where's your heart in that situation? And so we need to really work at trying to not quarrel, because when we quarrel, we're actually doing wrong, and that's not always easy to do.
You're good at these. I must have given you a lot of practice.
Yes.
No, but
likewise,
he's good at
We've been blessed to have something like this, and to have some godly people, like we said, in our lives early on when we were first married. Besides our parents modeling it, our parents were both great models of a wonderful relationship.
We've been very blessed.
We have been blessed more than a lot of people, and we understand that. But we also have had great counselors that have pointed out some key things. And hopefully in this conversation, you've gotten some of those that you can implement in your marriage relationship to make it better.
One of the things that my husband is going to do for you guys is a gift, and it's not available today, so you're going to have to watch your email. If you're signed up for our email list, I will send you out a notification of this, but he is going to make a frameable thing that's a little bit more up to date than the one that we got back 25 years ago, and send it out. So if you want to frame it, put it in your house, or just to be reminded somewhere, maybe in your journal. So sign up for our email list, and we'll send that Anything else you want to say before we quit?
I think that that's about everything, and we just really hope that somehow we've blessed you guys through this talk, and that you could pick something out of it and use it in your marriage to make your marriage better, and your relationship with your children also.
Yep. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave us a comment below the video. And we say blessings on your marriage, and shalom.
Shalom.